how do I need to respond? Is this a wolf that I need to walk away from? Is this an opportunity that is going to be destructive? Is this, is it something I need to do more research on? Or is it something I just need to walk through?
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking, I just want it to go away.
Exactly.
What will make it go away? I'm afraid of failing, so I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of financial whatever, so I'm going to hang on tightly to everything that I have.
Yeah.
And the scripture, is so clear on this. Those of you who are Christ followers, and you can see the challenge. What's the thing that people struggle with so often? It's being generous. It's giving.
Yeah.
And yet the Bible says that giving is the path to God providing. Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling Podcast. It's great to see you on this, what I hope is a beautiful day, wherever you may be watching and listening from. We're coming to you live. Well, we're coming to you from the great state of Florida, down at the very bottom where it's always warm and hot. And what we're going to talk about today actually impacts South Florida, really all of Florida statistically, maybe more than most places in the country, because we're going to talk about fear and how it can keep us from being who we were created to be, keep us from being successful in our relationships, in our businesses, even with our walk with God. And as I was doing some research, I discovered that here in South Florida, people have a higher level of PTSD because of hurricanes.
Interesting.
That hurricanes truly do impact the quality of life for a lot of people. And I remember that in 2004, we had one hurricane after another. And they put up the shutters and we took them down and we put them up and we took them down. I mean, it was crazy. We had several folks who here at Potential Church actually moved just because of the stress of hurricanes. And we live in a day when stress is spread, anxiety, fear is spread incredibly quickly because of social media, right? Something happens on the other side of the world, now I know it. And I've got to deal with it emotionally. And I just don't really believe that we were created to deal with the world's stress. And so as a result, our anxiety levels are off the chart, mental health is off the chart, suicide is off the chart. And I don't know, Scripture and wisdom gives us effective ways to deal with anxiety and fear and worry. But I just don't think we were created to take on the world's problems. And yet many of us, right, are dealing with that. And sadly, the older we get, a lot of times people just stay home and they turn on their cable news, and what gets the clicks and what makes the money is the things that make us anxious, because that's what we stop and we click on. Somebody's life fell apart. There's a hurricane. There's a school shooting. There is somebody we know that gets divorced, right? Those are the things that we stop on. It's not the good news. It's not the things in the world that are going right. It's all the things that are going wrong. And let me just share this with you, and then Carson and I are going to talk a little bit about this. But just a few statistics that kind of blew me away. If 1% of the workforce gets laid off, so 99% of the people working there keep their job, but 1% gets laid off, listen to this statistic. Even if 1% workforce layoff, it can trigger a 31% rise in voluntary turnover. In other words, the 1% freak out the 99%, and many of them leave thinking they're going to be next. And you know who leaves first is the high performers. And so you can think that this then starts a horrible cascade where your best, you get rid of 1% so you can move forward within the business, right? Kind of a pruning, which is a biblical idea, right? We prune so that we can grow. And then your best performers, 31%, actually leave because they're afraid. And it's important to know that, because if we don't, then we don't communicate confidence. And as a result, fear just kind of overwhelms the company. 18% of adults have an anxiety disorder. So that's almost 1 in 5. So you just think about the room that you're in. There's probably 5 people, which means that statistically, one of them have a disorder, which it doesn't mean they just kind of deal with fear. Here's some of the things that happens as a result of that disorder. 73% avoid social situations. So that's, a lot of people when you think about it, right? Who just say, I'm not going to be around people. 53% become short-tempered. And aren't we seeing that in our world? Between the road rage, all the anger that we have, 43%, they avoid meetings. And then there's not collaboration. Think about how that hurts a company. Think about how that can even hurt a family, right? Especially extended family at Christmas and holidays, where people are just overwhelmed. And depression and anxiety, think about this, cause the loss of 12 billion working days annually globally. 50 million years of work.
Wow.
Are impacted because of anxiety. And it costs about $1 trillion every year. So it's a huge impact. And, we all experience it in some way. But I wanted to talk about it. I get Carson and Luke with me again. And
Yes.
he's leading our next gen ministry, our preschool.
Leading. It sounded like you said leaving. I'm leading.
Leading. Yes, I don't want to scare those.
Yeah, exactly.
I want 31% of the people leaving. So, but yeah, leading those ministries. So he can share with us a little bit from your own experience, but also what you're seeing amongst that population. But I wanted to talk about fear and anxiety and its impact. Some of the research I said showed that it impacts, divorce rates.
Yeah.
It impacts income. Now, what's interesting is statistically, if you look, people who make more money are less anxious. Okay, which makes sense in one way,
Sure.
right? But what I would wonder in the study is that before or after. In other words, is the correlation I make more money, so I'm not as worried, so my anxiety level's lower, or is it I'm dealing effectively with my anxiety, so therefore I make more money?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I don't know which way it really goes. I know what it's like to be stressed about money.
Right.
You know what I mean? Both personally and, in the organization that I'm leading at times in different ways. But I don't know if I am always worried. Does that impact my ability to create wealth?
Yeah. Well, I think an interesting part of that, again, you could studies are always interesting because you could, dive into them further and further and really try and understand why we think the way we think. But when it comes to fear, especially in that realm, right, of money, I almost think that as you start to pursue greater financial income, and not that that's everyone's goal, but just as, it can often be a byproduct of whatever the vision, the dream that you have for your life. I think that you start to realize, at least for me, you start to realize how much you actually do have control over. And I think what can cause a lot of anxiety for people is feeling out of control. And it's easy to take a step back from being engaged in your own life. And then it starts to feel like everything is out of your control. Like there's nothing you can do.
Right.
It's just everything's falling apart. There's nothing you can do. You can't change it. You can't fix it. And that's where you see people get in this really serious fear. But I think people who make more money often have this understanding, hey, there are things I can control. And that's what I'm going to focus on, is those things that are within my power. I think that there's always going to be a long list of things that are outside of our control. When it comes to finances, when it comes to what's the market going to do, but for me, the focus has to be on, well, what are the things that I can control? That's where my focus is going today. That's where my thought is going to be. It's going to live in what I can do, what I can control.
Yeah. And so much of that is, is personal in the sense of, you can control what you're thinking. You can
Hmm.
control how you respond to others. Because one of
Right.
the other things that statistically it showed is that fear makes people, they respond in anger.
Mm.
And, and we see that. And one of the questions that I jotted down is why is fear such impactful in today's leadership? And I think it's monetized. I mean, I really do believe if you go on YouTube or you go, you've got dancing, which is positive, I guess. You know what I
Right.
mean? Especially on the short form videos and the short form apps and those kind of things. But so much of what is monetized is fear. That's why politics has become entertainment, and it's
Mm.
the negative.
Right.
I mean, you got two different sides, and one side is talking about why you need to be afraid of the other, and it laughs at them and mocks them. And you know, I have we all have our beliefs about social issues and political issues, but fear is monetized.
Yeah.
It's what gets people's attention, and it's always been that way. The news has always been about the negative and what you need to be afraid of.
Right.
The problem is now it's in our face all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't get away from it.
And so we're going to be a more fearful people.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot, and like we make up things to be afraid of.
Hmm.
Earthquakes, could wipe out the California coast.
Yeah.
Well, that's always, it's not like there's some new study or I mean, they take, somebody takes something that they read somewhere and now they make that the headline.
Right.
Every video, again, is put in some sense of negative or fearful. And so it's hard, difficult. You have to be very intentional not to be afraid.
Yeah.
And then that fear follows you
Right.
into your leadership or into your decision making.
Absolutely.
I asked the question, so how do we overcome the fear of the unknown?
Yeah. I think it's a tough one because, you know, you can, out of a desire to just bring confidence, hey, everything is going to be fine, right? That's most common what a parent would say to a child who's afraid of a test or trying out for a sports team. But the truth is, as we get older, we realize things may not be fine. There's not necessarily this guarantee we can give that it's all going to work out in the way that you are hoping it's going to work out. And so I think that can it can really hinder us a ton, that idea of what's going to happen.
Don't you think though too that that's true, but we're just more aware of it today too, in the sense that it's like with COVID, the vast majority of people
Right.
were okay.
Right.
I mean, it took people's lives. It did horrible things to our economy. And people lost their lives. So it was a horrific event. But, percentage-wise, the vast majority of folks,
Right.
were okay on the other side of it. Even though they could have, thought, how in the world will I ever survive being shut down?
Right.
The world's shutting down for that amount of time. But because we see every time it doesn't work out, we hear about all the folks who die of cancer, not the folks who survive it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So where in the past somebody might say, hey, look, it's going to be okay. And maybe statistically for the vast majority of folks, whatever it was, it would be okay. Doesn't mean it's always going to be okay. Doesn't mean, but now as an individual, you have to deal with all the people it wasn't okay.
Right. Yeah.
And that I think creates even a greater anxiety or fear. There are lots of stories in the Bible of people being afraid and how they overcame it. One is the people of God. I write about it in the book where they're leaving Egypt and Egypt pursues them. And now they've got the strongest military in the world behind them, and they've got the Red Sea in front of them.
Yeah.
And they freeze, which fear can do.
Right.
And they go to God and they're like, God, why'd you get us here? This isn't fair. And God doesn't pat them on the head.
Nope.
What God says is go.
Yeah.
Why? I told you I was going to take you to the promised land.
Yeah. Why are you crying to me?
Yeah, just go. And I have to remind myself of that.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of times when we're afraid, we want people to feel sorry for us.
Right.
Tell them how bad it is and
Right.
why why we're afraid and why we're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And God's like, hey, I created you on purpose to do something of significance. I've given you a vision. I've given you a purpose. I've given you a destiny.
Yeah.
Why are you sitting over here, overwhelmed
Yeah.
with your fear?
Well, and it's for me, I don't know how to remove fear from faith in the sense that it's supposed to be the thing that separates us from the rest of the world. The rest of the world, in many ways, when you read through scripture, is supposed to be afraid.
Right.
Without the belief in God, there should be fear of what's going to happen, of what's and that's where we're supposed to be different. And as you said, it's just such a shame that you can look in our world and see the Christ followers who are meant to show the world that we don't have to live in fear because of the promise we hang on to. And yet, as you said, there's just so much fear, even in that community. For me, I think when it comes to the fear of the unknown, one of the things that has been helpful for me is self-awareness. We live in a world that justifies emotions as a whole, even if they're not healthy. There's been this wave of mental health awareness. And I'm not trying to say it's all bad by any stretch, but there is a segment of it that's become very popular, which is your emotions are always valid, they're always justified, and therefore, if there's something that puts you in a bad emotional state, then that thing is bad. And I just don't think that's true. I think that we have to have the self-awareness to understand this fear is not justified. And so I have to fight against it. And I think as you see those things pan out, the fear doesn't come as quickly or as strongly the next time around. And I think that fear is just one that we have to, in our mind, in our heart, we have to battle against it. We have to understand this fear is not justified. It's not. Whether you want to look at, like you said, statistically, when you look at the stats, as you said with COVID, it's like it's not justified. I'm going to be okay. I've got to remind myself that and fight against it and choose to act not in the state of fear, but in the state of confidence. But I think, on the other end, you've got the promise as Christ followers that we hang on to. There's no fear that's justified because he has already overcome the world. And therefore, that initial response of fear, there's nothing I can do about. That's going to happen. But how long I choose to think about that fear, how much freedom I give that fear in my life is up to me. I've got the power to focus on what I have confidence in.
And to act,
Right.
Peter got out of the boat to walk on the water,
Right.
And God told the people of Israel, he said, I want you to go,
Yeah.
to move, because there is a part of fear. Fear can, negatively, because that fight or flight. So we can run away. And there's some things we need to avoid, right? Fear is not necessarily a bad thing if it is handled effectively.
Right.
But it can cause us to run away, to avoid, risk, to avoid leading, to avoid, or to freeze. And leaders, that happens a lot of times to leaders, especially if, things are difficult. And that is, well, should we go left or right? Well, let me do a little more research.
Yeah.
If you're a church, let me pray about it. And you
Yeah.
need to pray about it. And, that's because God, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your understanding, all your ways acknowledge him. He will direct your paths, right? He'll make it clear. Doesn't necessarily make it easy, but he'll make it clear what you need to do. But still, even if it's clear, you got to go.
Yeah.
You can't set at the stop sign forever. You gotta go. You gotta go right. You gotta go left. And fear, I think, can cause us to miss opportunities, relational opportunities. Afraid of how people will respond.
Yeah.
Financial opportunities. Success opportunities, and so I think it's important to recognize it and then ask ourselves, how am I going to deal with this?
Yeah.
Not, so many times we, like you were saying, we're driven by our emotions. So we, rather than say, what do I need to do with this fear? We ask the question, how do I get rid of it?
Right.
And that's really, the wrong question. We need to ask, okay, how do I need to respond? Is this a wolf that I
Right.
need to walk away from? Is this an opportunity that is going to be destructive? Is this, is it something I need to do more research on? Or is it something I just need to walk through?
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking, I just want it to go away.
Exactly.
What will make
Exactly.
it go away? I'm afraid of failing, so I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of financial whatever, so I'm going to hang on tightly to everything that I have.
Yeah.
And the scripture, you know, is so clear on this. Those of you who are Christ followers, and you can see the challenge. What's the thing that people struggle with so often? It's being generous. It's giving.
Yeah.
And yet the Bible says that giving is the path to God providing.
Right.
That he puts his resources into the hands of the people who will do with it what he
Yeah.
wants done. But so many times that takes faith,
Mm-hmm.
right? To trust God. I know individually, church, ministry, for those of you who have never been involved in it, is always an act of faith. I mean, there's only been a few churches I've known in my whole life, that had an abundant amount of resources, not because people aren't per se generous, but because the goal
Right.
of ministry is to minister.
Right.
It's not to hang on to.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, it goes back to what you had said the goal is not to remove fear. Because if there was no fear, you could really say there wouldn't be faith, right? If there wasn't fear of this may not work out, then it wouldn't be faith.
Right.
But there is the fear of, man, but if this doesn't pull through, if this doesn't happen, I don't know what I'll do.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it faith, but it's also what gives you confidence the next time around.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Not that it becomes easy ever, but it's what gives you confidence. You know what? It panned out that first time. I think the same thing's going to happen this time. And I think that's the danger of giving into fear, is that you create this cycle that becomes so hard to get out of, and it becomes anxiety, right? Just the thought of it starts to make you anxious because you've given into that fear time and time and time again. And that's where you see people just get stuck. They just can't ever move forward because they've created so much stress around what's going to happen, or what, if this doesn't pan out, what's the future going to look like? And so that's why I think it's just so important, as you said, got to take that step in the face of fear.
Sometimes, you think sometimes it doesn't per se lead to, you got to have courage to do the right thing, even if the right thing is not going to be celebrated.
Yeah.
Right. You got to get out of the boat, even if everybody in the boat's going to laugh at you.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a time where that's always been challenging for folks. But now it's even more challenging because you can get canceled, and everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
And it gets shared.
There's more people in the boat laughing at you
Yes.
now than there used to be.
Yes. And maybe you could only hear two of them that were close to you. And
Right.
the others may have been laughing, but you couldn't even hear them. Where now you can hear everybody. It's called the comment section, or
Yep.
it's called X, And so I think that is takes a courage and a boldness
Yeah.
to do or say or lead in a way that is right, even though you can't control
Yeah.
what people are going to. I mean, you can be wise, but, I don't know when people are watching or listening to this, but it's like, the Cracker Barrel thing.
Yeah.
It's like they just decided to change their logo, and people went crazy. And, so much of the woke stuff that people talk about was there before they ever decided to change their logo. I mean, if you look at Cracker Barrel was struggling financially, right? They weren't having the success they wanted. So they step back and they say, people aren't coming and buying what we're selling, or we would be succeeding. But
Right.
we're having struggles. So what do? Do we just sit here and die? Or do we think we need to change?
Mm-hmm.
The culture's changed, people have changed, and maybe the folks who wanted to come and experience the environment that we had, or maybe people just want something different. That's, to me, this is totally different from all the woke stuff and all the, things that people have accused them of doing. I don't think that the way they changed the dining rooms or the logo had anything to do with the woke stuff. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe I'll be proved wrong, but I just think it shows why sometimes people just let the ship sink,
Yeah.
because it's like all of a sudden people decided that that logo, was woke. It was, for some people unbiblical and all of that. And you think, well, what else could they have done? And I think that watching that happen, if you're a CEO, it can be, you can stop leading.
Yeah.
I think that happened with COVID. One state shut down and then they all shut down. One
Right.
company made a decision, then they all made a decision because they didn't
Yeah.
want to be the one who got it wrong.
Yeah.
And you've got to be willing to risk getting it wrong to get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
You got to get out of the boat if you're going to walk on the water. And, walking on the water, if everybody walked on the water, then there wouldn't take any courage to get out of the boat.
Right.
And so whatever boat people might be in, you have to deal with your fear.
Yeah. There's a guy who would compete in X Games all the time. His name is Travis Pastrana, and he would do the motorcycles, the dirt bikes. And he got asked about, man, like you just risk your life on every jump. That like if it goes wrong, there's a high likelihood you die. How do you deal with that? And he very innocently was like, to be honest with you, I don't really ever think about it not working. I normally think about it working. And I think that there's an innocence, but I think that's what leads us through fear. Is we do get to decide where our mind is going to be, where our energy is going to go as far as what we're thinking about. And I think that, when you get out of the boat, you can focus on the people who didn't, or you can focus on what exists outside the boat. And that is going to determine a lot of where that fear comes from. You know what I mean? It's the idea of just where are you looking? Are you looking at the possible future you could have outside the boat? Or are you focused on all that you'd be leaving behind should you take that step? And again, it was very innocent, but I think that when I heard that, it really stood out to me is, that's got to be the key to fear, is just focused on, I think this is going to work.
People today don't have the opportunity. The older you get in whether it's age or an organization, you've fell, right?
Right.
Your jump didn't succeed.
Yeah.
So hopefully, though, by that time, you've strengthened your courage muscles.
Yeah.
I think today, because you think, well, why do we see so much anxiety amongst young people? And I think some of it has to do with they didn't get to live through a naive stage. In other words, where like you said, they just naturally thought everything was going to work out.
Right.
And it did, for the most part, either because a parent stepped in or a teacher or a coach or whatever. I don't mean that they never failed. But today, again, the world is at their fingertips. So they see a bunch of people fail. They see a bunch of people not work out. And I wonder if that means then that throughout life, their courage muscles don't get the same opportunity to develop. In other words, they need a bunch of courage right off the bat.
Yeah.
To overcome their fear, as opposed to being able to kind of slowly maybe build those muscles a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Epictetus who says that like it's really not about what happens to you, but it's about how you feel about what happens to you. And I think in the same way, it's just very evident that our fear is not actually failing. Rarely is it actually failing. It's what are people going to think about the failure? You know what I mean? I think that if no one saw your failure, you'd be a lot less worried about it because you would see it for what it is. It's moving forward. It's that idea of failing forward, but it's people's perception of the failure that I think makes it really, really hard to deal with. There was a study done that we don't have time to go through it, but Solomon Asch did a study, I think in 1951, that showed that even though there was one person who knew the right answer, very obvious, but because the rest of the group of actors gave the wrong answer first, 75% of the time they changed their answer to fit with the group, even though they knew it was the wrong answer. And I just think that it shows, that we care deeply about what people think. But I think a huge key to not being afraid of failure is working through that, working through how much we care about people's perception. Because I think that fear in my opinion, especially amongst young people, is the biggest fear. It's just, what are people going to think? What are people going to say? How are they going to respond? I think people know that failures has to happen, right? Like, there's no way around it. And so I don't think it's necessarily the actual failure that makes them afraid. It's just, what are people going to think about that failure? What are people going to say about that failure? Are my employees no longer going to trust me after this failure? It seems like the people who deal the best with fear don't stress about that, or at least they don't allow themselves to become overwhelmed with it.
Right. Well, because again, you think of social media and all the avenues in which to see all the people succeed. May not be real success,
Yeah.
right? But all these people get it right, and I'm the one
Exactly.
loser who has got it wrong. And one of the things I've noticed about fear is, again, we tend to want to get out from underneath it. So we say, for me, I can say, well, next week the offering will be better, or people will show up, right? And I'm trying to get out from underneath being afraid
Yeah.
of what happens if it doesn't, or if, whatever it is. But then you miss life.
Yeah.
And you miss what's happening today. And I've been thinking a lot about that quote from The Office, that I've shared a couple of times on the live stream, but is that I wish there was a way when we knew we were in the good old days.
Yeah.
Because so many times we don't realize they were the good old days until they're in the past
Exactly.
instead of in the moment. And I think fear is the big thief.
Yeah.
It's an emotion that God's given us to help
Yeah.
us succeed, but the enemy, just like love or sex, the enemy loves to pervert those things to destroy us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to encourage those of you who are watching or you're listening today, as we've talked about fear, to ask yourself the question, what do you need to do? Not how do you get out from underneath it, right? Because it's a part of life. What you're running after, what you've been called to do, what you dream of accomplishing, whether it's having children or whether it's impacting the next generation or marriage or building a company or starting a church, whatever it is, right? Those things, there's lots of obstacles to those things. But rather than thinking, how do I get out? But what do I need to do with this fear I'm feeling? Is this to help me make a right or left decision? Is this something I need to do more research on? Or is this an opportunity to grow and build? It's like the brother Jesus said that perseverance, right? Trials, celebrate those things that can bring about fear. Why? Because they strengthen us. And the greater the vision, the greater courage and strength you're going to need in order to succeed, because the more adversaries you're going to have along the way. So no matter who you might be, here's the reality. You can overcome your fear through faith and walk on the water. It's an exciting thing to, once you've walked on the water, you're always looking for an opportunity to get out of the boat.
Yeah.
And even if you sink time to time, you still can't get over the feeling of walking on the water. So let me encourage you, get out of the boat, walk on the water, and make a difference in somebody's life. And one person at a time, you can change the world around you. Thanks for hanging out with us today. I hope you've been encouraged. If we said something that, you think somebody needs to hear that, just hit share. I'm amazed. It's just a click of the button in today's world. We can talk a lot about the dangers of social media and all of that, but just think about it. Just a click might positively impact somebody's life. So share it with somebody. Leave us a comment. Tell us how you deal with fear, because we can surely learn from one another. And fear is something we all wrestle with. Some of us more than others, but we all wrestle with it, and it can be an incredible roadblock in our lives. I know that, my wife is someone who has great faith, and I am someone who can have great fear. And so together we make a great couple, but I'm trying to learn from her to be as bold as a lion, as the scripture says. Hey, if you haven't picked up a copy of my book, let me encourage you to do that, and check out our new live stream. It's every Wednesday at high noon. It's called The Break Room. just kind of hang out, have a little bit of fun before we get into the afternoon and all the incredible things that are going on in your life and in ours. Hey, we'll see you next Thursday right here on the Troy Gramling Podcast. It's been awesome to hang out with you. Subscribe, share, and we'll see you next Thursday. God bless.